came here as a young adult or a young child, whatever, I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, if they were born here or if they came here from somewhere else, if they did, where they come from, and what it was like for them here in early Kenai, either as a child or as an adult. And maybe they'll share some stories, and then we want to open it up to everybody in the area who would like to ask some questions about early Kenai or share some of your stories from early Kenai. We have 2 mics. They will have one, and then Mary has volunteered to pass the mic around to the people who want to ask questions. So all you have to do is raise your hand or yell, "Hey, Mary," and she will hand you a mic so that you can ask questions of our guests. So with that, we will start, unless you have questions or announcements. Hearing none, I will Marge.
I give a little data. My husband, Frank Mullen, took the 1950 census, started in Milton and went to Hope. And the village of Kenai was 321 people. And Soldado didn't even appear because we didn't have 25 people.
What year was that? You said 1950?
I figure I was born.
Is this on? It must be. Okay. My name's Rowley. I came in 1950. My father had come here to start an electric utility. He had a electric utility in Mountain View, and that had sold to Chugash Electric. So when that happened, he came down with some of his linemen, and his linemen were he got half pay, half in dollars, the other half in stock in the company. And so they were believers, or they had nothing else to do. One of the two. So quite actually an interesting group of guys. We would have, I guess one of my first memories come here. I came here with my dad, and my mom stayed with the rest of our family in Mountain View. And I came here, as I say, born in 43. So we, one of my, probably the most enduring memory that I had of those early days was smell. Of course, I was in the first grade, right? Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm going to eat it. They're all right. So at any rate, it was an old town at that time still, and most of the buildings, or a lot of the buildings were covered in sheet metal, corrugated sheet metal, and over by the old post office there was a general store, and Helen Jones had her store over by the mouth of the river. And walking into some of those old stores, a little kid, of course, what does he think about eating all the time? And smell is number one in eating, and so that's what I remember. And every Sunday, the bookkeeper would soak her up enough to make chicken and dumplings. And I had a real aversion to chicken and dumplings his dumplings weren't exactly clouds. And so, but it was pretty interesting. Then I left, and I decided that the bachelor life at 6 or 7 wasn't for me, and so my dad took over. One of the interesting experiences I had was it must have been Halloween. My dad was going to take me back to Anchorage to be with my mother, so he wanted to scrub me up, make me look presentable. And so we, the barber, however, had been put in jail for drunken disorderly. And so I needed a haircut pretty bad. So my dad took me over to the jail, and the barber couldn't stand out Robert Peterson at the time, the barber. And so, so he couldn't stand out of the jail cell, so they opened up the cell door, and we would go in. And I don't remember, someone might know, I don't remember if the bars were pipe or wood, but it was the bars.
Where was that jail located?
Okay, that would be,
You were the jail one?
right.
It was right down, let's see.
Because the jail
down
is
from
in the art
church.
center. The cell, that jail
Church.
cell is still in the art center, as most of you
No,
know.
no, this is a different one. This is a different one.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious about that.
It was 1950.
Yeah, it was right down by the
It was
wellness center there on the.
right, that's correct. It's between Helen Jones' store, it was Alaska Commercial, Kenai Commercial was it, and the Russian church. Halfway between the two down that road. And so it was apparently a cold morning, so they had a kettle of hot buttered rum on the stove. So I don't honestly know whether there was any rum in that or not, but I certainly got my cup full. So that was a trip to the barber, and that's about all I remember of the early, my first trip here. And then of course we came back, and the whole family settled in about 1955. But I'll leave it at that at this point, and ask questions later on.
Oh, yes. He's the older.
Well, my name is Evelyn Boulette, back to it, my maiden name, family name Miller. What's the other one? And I was born here, Kenai, because you said 200 or some people were here in the 50s. Well, oh, okay. 250 people here, then that's probably counting the dogs and everybody else. But no, I was born here, and I remember when they put in that thing, because it's right next to my grandma's house. Now, it was loud, but the thing that was wonderful about that, because I was a kid that was in charge of keeping the lamps with gas in them or whatever, and I'm telling you, when that light bulb was hanging down in the middle of the room, and you came in and hunted for that string and pulled it, and the light came out, it was wonderful. So anyhow, my earliest memory, well, I won't go back that far, but Kenai, Kenai to me was their Bradissos, Kenai Joes, here into the Russian church. That was the Kenai I grew up in. And small town, everybody knew everybody, and everybody's business, which is typical. and I don't know, it was safe. You felt so safe, maybe because you knew everybody. And our playground was the beach. That was before all the trucks came to room the beach, you know. And then the normal activity of us kids were just like any other group, I think. But, and also when, where he lived next door, I think Harry White and his, were they there when?
They sold up.
Okay, they were there, but there was another guy who lived there before that. He was Sweepstake Johnson was his name. But I don't know who he was or whatever name he had, but he had a daughter and that's where they lived there. But I don't know who lived there before that either. You know, so it's interesting. It would be nice to know if someone knew, you know, who he was.
It was a very old cabin. It was built.
Yeah,
We had,
they were all old cabins.
we had,
Put the mic over to him.
That was very typical. If you take an old cabin in Kenai, rip it down, you're going to find cardboard boxes, newspapers, and all that as part of the insulation. You know, so And also the store, Cecil and Helen Jones owned the store. You always hear about Cecil and Helen, but they were really nice people. But the people that, the storekeeper before that was Stefan's. And you never hear anybody mention Stefan, have you? No, and they remember they had a son named Vince. And I don't know how long they were here, but they were here before. But Helen and Cecil were the ones that everybody remembers, you know. And I know them very well because they hired me to clean their house. I was always looking for work. And I don't know, it was nice living in Kenai. There wasn't much going on. I mean, I always liked to work. I was one of the first telephone operators. It was the old, you know, I don't think I was very good, but I was only like 15, 16, and they got 50 cents an hour. And I think I worked from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. And I remember they had like numbers like 214 or whatever, but they never asked for like give me 214. They said, give me Phil Wilson's house, or and Helen Jones. I was ringing the bell, and she ringing her phone, you know, whoever she was calling, but I was ringing her. She said, you're ringing the bell in my ear. That's why I said I don't think I was a very good operator. That was a job. And also the first theater in Kenai, I was hired. There was a guy from the South that it was just a building down by the bluff. I don't know what it was. It had a bar in there. They built bleachers, and he said, would I like to run it? I remember he was talking, we had such a heavy accent, Southern accent. I couldn't understand him. You know? But he hired me. So I would go get, you know, the movies back then, they came in the big reels. I get the reels, and I get the posters, go around town, decide what days I wanted the movies on, put them around town. Then I would go and sell tickets to the movie, and behind the counter sell candy. James Showalter is the one that ran the projector. And I got $10 a week, which is pretty good money considering, you know, back you buy candy for a nickel, you know. So anyhow, it was fun being in Kenai, did all the other stuff with your friends and hung out and all that stuff. It was really safe and nice, and I just loved my old town, Kenai.
My name is Barb Jewell. I was a Sandstrom. I was the oldest of 3 girls, and we originally came from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My dad came in 1949 in the summer. He was hired by Alaska Road Commission. And then the family came up in the summer of 1950. Our uncle and aunt drove us up in a Chevy Suburban carryall. And that Alcan Highway was just horrible. When we got to Anchorage, I just couldn't believe that it was an actual city, and they had lawns. We visited friends near the park strip. So in those days, the highway wasn't completed to Kenai or Soldotna, so the car was put on the Alaska Railroad, and we came to Seward, and of course we had to go around that big roundabout that the Alaska Railroad had years and years ago, and then drove to Soldotna. And the roads were unbelievable. They were so narrow and everything. Well, when I got to Soldotna, and Marge has already mentioned, and this was 1950, what the population was. Well, it was just a few houses and trees, and that was about it. We lived in Paul Nestor's Quonset hut, that one half of the Quonset hut. And I was so disappointed because I was thinking, oh, we'll have a lawn like Anchorage had and everything else. What utter disappointment. But we lived through that. And about a year and a half, my father built a house where Wells Fargo currently sits in Soldotna. Mother and Dad dug them well, and it was a 20 by 20 house, and how she ever raised 3 girls in that house is beyond me. She's in heaven, and she gets a star for that. We went to school in Kenai, but we were the first year that the Kenai school that you see sitting over there on the Spur Highway was open. Walter Kovich was our first bus driver. He had a Chevy Carryall Suburban, and he carried about the 3 Sandstrom girls the two Petrovich kids that came from Naptown. And Naptown, if you know, is now Sterling, renamed Sterling. And we probably picked up a Lancashire kid or two, and that was it. And he was our bus driver for 1 or 2 years, and then Burton Carver bought some rickety old buses, and somehow we managed to get back and forth between Kenai and Soldotna School. If the school bus was late, the road commission crew came out and looking for us. So that was interesting to say the least. School, I thought we had very good school teachers in those days. And for entertainment, we just played board games, canasta, listened to the radio, ice skated, toboggan, skating, sledding, reading books, and we really did our homework and everything too. So they were very interesting days. They were pretty primitive. We didn't have a store in Soldotna at first, so we came into the Kenai commercial to shop, as well as our parents ordered food by, our canned goods by case lot, and it came into the Seward and then was sent over to us. It's really interesting. We all went to school together, and so through the years we have come and gone, and we're all back, and most of us are all back in the same place. In 1998, we did a Kenai Territorial School reunion, and I brought some of the pictures for that. But we had so much fun reminiscing. Some of the old teachers were able to come back for it too. And so besides the planning committee and that reunion, it was a lot of fun. So, and I've enjoyed it. I was here till 1958, and then I came back in 1971 for 1 year, and here I am all those years later. But I just like being part of the community. Soldotna has grown from a narrow trail, a narrow road, to a wonderful community too. So Kenai and Soldotna, they may have had their arguments, but we're good to go both ways though too, because Kenai's part of us as well as Soldotna.
My name is Dick Rieger. I was born in Northern California, in the town of Chico. My dad moved to Anchorage in 1949 when they were building the Elmendorf landing facility out there, the Air Force facility and that. And they didn't have any mechanics in town, and he got a call from a friend of his, Jimmy Sumter, who owned a bar in Anchorage, told Dad that they didn't have any civilian mechanics in Anchorage and they needed somebody to come up. And at that time, after the Second World War, they had an economic depression in Northern California. And Dad was trying to make a living running a garage. He couldn't do it, so he threw his toolbox in the back of a yellow Ford pickup, and he and a friend drove up the Alcan Highway to Anchorage, and he tended bar for a couple of weeks for Jimmy Sumter, and then he found a garage up there. And he was up there from 1949 till 1952. We came to visit him in 1951, and I really missed my dad. Didn't have a male leader in the family, so it was kind of interesting. I was beginning to get in trouble in California, so I was glad to get out of California. I had the experience of living in Anchorage for the summer and spent my days fishing in Ship Creek up there, and to the point that they wouldn't let me bring fish in the house anymore. And we went back to California that winter and decided we were going to move to Alaska. Dad had talked to Bert Carver about buying his garage there in Soldotna that he was building at that time. And so the family packed up in July of 1952 and drove up the Alcan and drove up the hard highway. We were the first non-commercial truck over the hard highway, and we had to wait 3 days to get approval from the Canadian government to come up the hard highway. But we drove all the way up. Mom made it all the way to just the other side of Sterling. She drove our 1941 Buick sedan with 2 of us kids in that, and 2 would ride with Dad in the one-ton truck that he had. And she got all the way over to about 10 miles the other side of Sterling, and she just couldn't drive anymore. She just broke down right there and started crying. And Dad had to talk to her for 20 minutes to convince her that we weren't going to live in the middle of a burnout forest like this, where actually trees were going to live. It was beautiful. And she finally got her act back together. We went in and we stayed in Bert and Joyce Carver's cabin for a while. I remember the two boys slept upstairs in the attic, and we could look right out through the end of the attic and see the snow outside. It was kind of cold. We were under quilts up there. We started the school in the fall, and it was different. I'd never lived in a native village before, where everybody knew everybody, but more than that, where everybody was related to everybody. If my young brother Doug was being picked on by one of the local kids here, and I went up and reminded him that if he didn't leave me alone, then he was going to have problems. Well, leave Doug alone, he was going to have problems with me. And it was only later that I found out that this kid was related to everybody in town. I thought I'd better keep my mouth shut. So anyway, school in those days was very interesting. We had, Barb and I agree, we both had some really good teachers. Our favorite teacher was Dave Dudley, who came up here, several years ago?
Yeah.
How many? 5, 6 years? No, maybe 10 years ago. Anyway. He came back, and we all got together, those of us that Dave, that were friendly and interacted with Dave. Dave really enjoyed directing plays, and so we had a lot of plays in school, and Barb brought a lot of information about some of the plays that we gave. The other thing that Dave did, because he was directed to by George Fabricius, who was the superintendent and the principal of the school here, he organized a hockey team, and the first hockey team in Kenai. And I brought a picture of the members of the kids on that hockey team, and I'll give that to June for her records when we're done. But those of you that might be interested in that, you're welcome to look at that. But there were 10 kids, 6 of them were from Kenai, and 4 were from Soldotna. Our best skater was Jim Segura, who he's shown in this picture, and I noticed that Jim didn't even have shin guards on. Anyway, most of us, we had no uniforms. Our shins, we protected our shins by using the shin guards for baseball catchers. And that's what we had. And for gloves, instead of regular hockey mitts, we had GI gloves with the fur on the back and the canvas. Yeah.
Can you tell us who was on that hockey team?
Yeah, it's right here in the picture.
Maybe you could tell us?
Can you
Can you tell us the names?
Yeah, I could name all of them.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay. From Kenai, there was Jim Segura. Nate Bagley at that time lived out at the highway department at a BPR camp just outside of town. Gary Drain was from Wildwood Station. Rudy Wilson and Billy Ivanov and Alfred Ivanov from Kenai. From Soldotna, it was Louis Bear, Wayne and Roger Tajik, and me. So that was our team, and we were a scruffy bunch. Most of us could hardly skate, and we had a lot of troubles getting going with that thing. But then finally, Ernie Nackstead showed up. And Ernie Nackstead was a professional hockey player from Canada. He's Henry's second cousin, you said? First cousin. Anyway, Ernie was a lifesaver for us. He taught us, first of all, how to skate. He taught us how to shoot, how to pass the puck, how to board people, how to guard people, do all that. And once Hank showed up, we were able to hold our own against teams from Anchorage and Nanilchik. The town of Nanilchik really got behind their hockey team. They built them a really nice rink, and they actually had boards around their hockey rink. We didn't have boards around our hockey rink. It was over at the at the east end of the school, and after the kids had got skating there at lunch, of course, the ice was a mess for playing hockey on in the afternoon, so we'd have to go out and scrape it all off. And we threw all the snow and stuff up around the hockey rink, and the snow piles were the boards for our hockey rink. And when the team came down to play us from Anchorage, they were just appalled. It was like going back and playing pond hockey with these kids. Anyway, we had in 1957, when I graduated from Kenai, there were 50 kids in school, 4 in our graduating class. There was Joanne Robinson, and Wayne Tatching, Jerry Benson, and me. Barb had gone to Anchorage in 1956 and graduated from Anchorage. But there was a small group of kids. We didn't have any laboratories, we didn't have any libraries, we didn't have any gyms. We just made do with what we could, and any athletic abilities we had were just natural. None of us were in shape or anything like that. We were just a bunch of wild-eyed kids playing football outside, or softball, or volleyball, or basketball, whatever we could out on gravel outside. It was nothing like it was after we left, anyway.
Well, I'm just a kid, so I can't talk about anything old. I was born in 1925 in Seldovia, Alaska. And I have lived in Alaska all my 96 years, with the exception of getting a little bit of education away from Alaska. And I don't ever intend to leave. I'm here. You got me. I want to talk about these people at the table with me. I can remember something maybe about each one of them, not individually, but about the family. And the first one I'm going to talk about is this little girl right here. What grade were you in when I taught you, Helen? Fifth grade. I had the school here, the school room with the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And I was a teacher only for the 1 year, because the teacher that was supposed to be here took one look at Kenai and turned around and grabbed the same plane back out. And so they didn't have anybody, and I was visiting, well, I wasn't visiting, I was living at the time with my parents. My dad was the marshal here, Alan Peterson, and mother was one of the teachers, and O.C. Conley and his wife were the others. And school was ready to start, and they didn't have a teacher. So mother convinced them that I could handle it, so I did. And this little girl right next to me had beautiful red hair, and she was a model child. She paid me before I said that. But she was one of the ones in my class, and there was nothing interesting about the class except that the kids kept me entertained. And there were two boys that were brothers, and they were Emery and James Showalter. And they kept me on my toes, let me tell you. Emery would sit in his desk and he would sketch me as I was talking, as school was in session. And that bothered me, but there was nothing I could do about it besides making a fuss, so I didn't do anything about it. But every once in a while, Emery and James would get up and start to write in the classroom. And there would be no words, there was I had no way of knowing that they were even about to do it. And they would, so I had arranged after the first time, and it was hard for me to get them to, they were bigger than me, because they were 14 and 16 years old at the time, and they were in the 5th and 6th grade.
And so I arranged with Mr. Conley that I would get word to him. He was in the next room with the high school students, and so he would come in and calm them down. So that was entertainment for the classroom. And it was fine, and after a while, the boys learned that you don't do things like that in the classroom. And so. But anyway, Evelyn was one of my prime, very, very good students. She was always cheerful and happy, and I never had any problem with Evelyn. And she was a lovely girl and has grown up to be a lovely lady, and I'm proud to know her. That's all I'm going to say. Now, Mr. Rowley over here, I knew his parents, I knew his father, who was all same God as far as I was concerned, because he brought electricity to Kenai. And the wonderful thing about it was that my folks who were living in the marshal's office, which was like you were describing, and by the way, if there was hot buttered rum, there wasn't any rum in it, I'll guarantee. With my father, if it came out of that jail, there was no rum in it. But anyway, my mother was a grandmother at that time. My son Jim was born. He was about a year old at that time. And they had never had electricity, ever. When we were in Seldovia, it was a long time ago. And then we were in Unga out on the Aleutians for 13 years. His dad was deputy marshal there before he was transferred in 1946 here to Kenai. So mother had never had the pleasure of electricity. And when electricity came to Kenai, mother said, I want a washing machine and a refrigerator. And that was really appreciated, I'll tell you. It was wonderful. So that's what I remember about them. They brought electricity to all of us, but my mother was especially appreciative of that. Barbara Sandstrom, I remember as a child, but I remember more her father, as he was working for the road commission, and he was a grader operator. And my Jim, with his Ford pickup, was always in a hurry. Wherever he went, he was always in a hurry. And he was hightailing it down the road. And whenever he saw the grader coming on the road, and of course everything was gravel then, Jim would just pull over to the side of the road, and the grader would come beside him and pull over to the side of the road. And Ray Sandstrom would get out of there and crawl in Jim's pickup, and they would have Jim would have a pipe full of smoke, and I don't know whether, I don't remember if Ray smoked or not.
He did, he rolled cigarettes for a while.
Oh, okay. Anyway, those two would laugh at each other's jokes before they even told the joke. They just loved to talk to each other. And so they would do that. They'd spit at each other, and that's what they do for 15, 20 minutes, and then Ray would get back out of the pickup and get back in his grader, and off Jim would go. He was a wonderful man. And the Rieger's mother was a wonderful teacher. She was one of the ones that I think that Kenai has on their good list, their gold star list of teachers that were around here. I remember her teaching the elementary grades. So that's all I'm going to say, because you can tell I'm old and I know a lot of stories, but I'm not going to tell them now.
So what happens now?
Raise your hand if you have a question or comment you'd like to share.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Jack Porter. I know all 5 of them. 4 of them I would not have recognized because I haven't seen for years, but still I know them all. Peggy, of course, I do recognize. I see her occasionally. But what I want to say, my mother was born in Chickalum, Alaska in 1921. My grandfather came up in 1914. At least that's what I'm told. But we didn't move to Kenai until the road actually opened in 1951, but we moved here in 51. And I've been mostly here ever since. However, I did spend several years working in Anchorage because my line of work wasn't available here. But what I want to say is, or ask is, do you people remember a couple of old Kenai people that were called Poopy Doop and Jiminy Crickets? Long, long time ago. They were really colorful characters here. And I can tell you a lot of stories like they could about old Kenai, but we'd be here all night if we started that. So I'll say that and quit.
You want to tell us about those two?
Fun.
Hi,
Give us any
I'm
information
Barb
on
Jewell, Allison Wick.
And I came to Kenai in 1957. I came to Alaska in 1948 with my folks, and we moved up to the Glen Highway, Tasalina, Deconer, Copper Center, and I lived up there. My mom and dad ran Tasalina Lodge, and they ran Deconer Lodge. And then when I was 13, I came back to Anchorage. In fact, I want to go back when my dad first came to Alaska. He worked at a place, if anybody remembers, called Fort Starnes. Does anybody remember Fort Starnes? Well, that's where he worked. He was a cook, and we lived there. And there was only one road. It was a small gravel road that led out of Anchorage to Kenai Peninsula. Well, I came to the Kenai Peninsula, as I said, in 1957. With my twin brother Billy, my mom and my dad, Harold and Jean Haviland. Well, her mom worked at a place called the Greeks at the time, if anybody remembers the Greeks. Do you remember that? The Greek, I think you were gone at that time. Anyway, she worked there, and then George Navarre had the grocery store. And we came into town, came from Anchorage to Kenai. The road was gravel, my twin brother, my mom and dad, and we drove into this little town. It was one little road, and I thought, wow, this is really small, because I'd come from Anchorage, it seemed like a big city compared to Tasalina Lodge and Kekona. And but when I came here, I fell in love. It was a small town, and it fit me. Yeah, I'm so emotional because I really love Kenai. And I felt like I had arrived, they say. And my mom ended up continuing to work when I was 13. I went to work for Helen Jones, cleaning house. And I worked from the time I was, I think, 12, either cleaning houses, working for Helen Jones, working in the drugstore with John Hewlin. If anybody remembers John Hewlin, he was the funniest man. And I won't tell all those, but he was a funny man, and I loved him dear. I loved working there. And I was in the old Napa building when they had when we had the earthquake. And do you know what I'm talking about? The old Napa building. It's a coffee shop, camp coffee shop now, I believe. And when they had the earthquake, I was in there. Danny Toloff and I were in there, and the pillars started just going, woo, like this. I got paralyzed, ran out of there, lost my shoes, and I remember Danny said, get in the truck, and I said, you get wherever you want, I'm not getting anywhere. And I was so scared. Anyway, I had a little Billy Lee at this time. I was 19, and she didn't even wake up from her nap. Maybe she was with my mother. Well, I proceeded to continue to work in Kenai, and I married Harold Wick. And Harold and I had 2 boys, and I already had Billy Lee. Billy Lee was Toot Halstead's daughter. And I don't know if anybody knows these people, but I raised Billy Lee and married Harold, and we were married for many, many years. And then 30 years ago, I married Larry Allison, and we had, it was 32 years ago, but we had wonderful years together. And all these years I was in Kenai, we knew everybody, and I loved it. I never wanted to leave. I'm not leaving. You know, I'm not going anywhere. I already got my plot out in North Kenai. I mean, I'm here. And it is a wonderful place to grow up as a young, shy person, and to become not so shy anymore and be able to have lifetime friends, supporters. The Rowleys, the Bactuas, the Showalters, Emery was hilarious. We were speaking about Emery. We used to go when I fished commercially with the father of my children, and we would come every spring to the cannery, and Emery always had an apple for my boys. Well, one year he had this apple waiting all spring, and my son Ricky said he didn't care for one. And Emery said, "You take this apple, I've been saving it all spring." I've had, and I'm still here, and I don't know, there's so much to share, and I should probably write about it someday, but I've had a wonderful life here at Kenai Peninsula, and blessed to be here, blessed to be here. And I thank God for my life here. Thank you.
Yeah, I got this one over here, Sharon. Hang on. Sharon's been waiting.
Liz is tremendous, and my twin sister's on the phone here. I've been FaceTiming her because you folks are just tremendous. And I've never really spent time with you, but Mary was our kids' teacher. But I'm going to talk about Peggy first, because Karen and I, we lived in Soldaten on the Spur in the little blue house, and we went to church with the Sandstroms. I remember being at your mom's house making special cookies, but I went to kindergarten over here in the white Quonset hut with Karen, and Peggy was our teacher. Our dad worked out at Wildwood, Jack Weaver, and our mom was Gladys Weaver, and she adopted Karen and I, or they did, and then we had our brother. He was Korean, so we were the potluck family. But through the years, Siri, the Native Corporation, and the Siri Foundation put out a book, and our mom and dad gave us our adoption papers many years ago, and it plopped in our lap, and so we have a biological family here in Alaska, and my twin and I, we have a sister. Karen lives in Spokane, but our sister lives through the woods from me in Soldaten, and we didn't know that till that book came out. But Peggy was our teacher, and she's going to say something.
I want to say something. Those two girls were the cutest things, and every morning they'd come in, and they were dressed identically. And they'd stand by the door with a smile on their face, and I had to guess which one was which. And what I get, 50% probably, not more than 50%. I could not tell those girls apart. They were the sweetest things.
And then the boys were there, and then Peggy she would let us sit together, but we were very identical. So Karen picked up a blue crayon, I probably had one, and...
That's right. I deliberately separated them so that they couldn't see each other. And if the children were coloring something, I'd look, and those girls would have the same crayon, the same color. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, and so it's just a treasure, and Maxine Rieger was your wife? Mom. Okay, because Karen had Maxine for a teacher at Soldaten Elementary. And the wealth of knowledge, the experiences of all of you folks that came to Alaska, whatever year you came, and going up and down the Alcan, and just the stories. When Mom had her donut shop, it was Gladys Bake Shop on the spur, and when the Seaman building over here opened, before she passed away, when we come into Kenai, she'd go, I made donuts for the grand opening for the Seaman building. And we have that donut machine, and thanks to Peggy and her education, I had a passion to be a teacher, and so I would read Homer Price to the kids, and we'd make donuts. And we made lots of donuts for Mom's service, and someday I should bring that into Kenai and make donuts. And it's just a blessing, the history you have and the camaraderie. And Evelyn, I didn't get to know you till I started working at the tribe, and just the history you have, the culture. I feel blessed because we came into a potluck family that didn't care what color, nationality we were, and Mom instilled in us a passion. And when the homesteaders came, they were not Kenai people. But look at this town. We are a potluck town of people coming with a passion, like this gal coming up the Alcan. Why would anybody do something like that? And my parents did that. And so the folks that were here to start with welcome these people. And I look around here, I mean, we are a potluck. I'm from Soldotna. I don't care if it's Kenai or Soldotna.
I have to say something about the homesteaders because, being raised here, born here in Kenai and everything, the way of life, that was our way of life. We lived off the land, we worked all summer to get through the winter. And then the homesteaders came out. They weren't used to that kind of life. And I tell you, I look up to the homesteaders because they built cabins. And we were used to our way of life, but they weren't. And yet they persevered and, still came back up here in the 40s. I just really think they just fit in. I mean, we were just people, fit in, and
It was a unique time, and even as a child, just everybody loved everybody, and maybe you didn't get along, you didn't like each other, but you needed each other. If you broke down, I didn't care if we didn't like each other, you helped me fix my tire, I helped you. That's how our folks were. They instilled something in us. And it's been passed, and I attribute it to the homesteaders and the people that were here, because you've passed on that legacy in a good way. And there are generations, I don't know how many now, but they're carrying on your legacy. And I'm proud of every one of you. And it is a gift to be here. And just bless you.
I brought in a couple of pictures. We've been acquiring pictures from Peggy, letting us come in and look at her mini albums and collections. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions about some of those. I will hand it to all of you to look at. If any of you know the answer, then maybe you could tell it. This is Kenai Community Library opening. It says November, but it doesn't say what year. I want you to look at the picture and tell me about when that might have been.
That library opened, I think, somewhere in the very early 60s, like 62 maybe.
The 60s? Where was it? That looks
It was over next to the old, you remember the old Civic Center where we lived when we first came to town? Okay, they built, right next to it, later they built a police station in there, in that area.
You need to look at the picture. I think this is an earlier one.
The library was, the shelves were on wheels, and when there was going to be a city council meeting, you turn the shelves around and push them against the wall. And so one time we were talking about the library, one of the council members said, I don't even know where this library is. And they said, you're sitting in it.
I don't think this is the Civic Center building. I think this is an earlier one, and I was hoping perhaps one of them would recognize it. You can pass it around.
What year is it?
It says the same. That's what I wanted to know.
I left Kenai in 56, and I don't remember having a library.
Was there perhaps one in the school?
There was one in the old school.
Yes, there was, yes.
Mother started that.
Say that again into the microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, probably is, yeah. Microphone.
Repeat that, please, where the library, the first library was in the school?
Use the microphone.
Here.
I think, I'm going to say that my mother started the first library in the old school, and that would have been the one that, so, and that was just books in a room.
Peggy, so which building are you identifying as the first school
The
building?
one that was, where the art center is now.
Are you sure? Are you sure as opposed to the one on the corner? The frame building next to the art center?
Oh, the civic
Well,
league
was
building.
it,
It's a concrete block building now.
yeah, the art center, I mean, the old school was destroyed, taken down.
Yeah.
And that's where the first library was.
Okay. Because people refer to both of those buildings alternately as all those things.
Yeah.
Memories get clouded, and they also went back and forth on those buildings, that they've been this, and there's a meeting there, and then it was the library, and back and forth. So I hear that all the time as I try and find out a little bit more information about the jail. Yeah, we were there or that, I mean, in my memory. I know that that building existed, the old school, with the many steps in the front. But that, I mean, what year was that destroyed?
That particular school?
Yeah.
It'd be about 1955, I think. 54, 55. When they tore it down, when they tore down the first American school.
Where's the picture?
Yeah, it could be.
It's right here. I'll pass it over.
Did she see it?
Well, I've seen that picture many times. It's
She wants to see
oh, yeah,
it.
yeah.
I don't know if
You
I've
want
seen
it.
that.
The new school was
Sorry.
started.
Those steps look like the old school steps.
This is a little bit of trivia. As the president of the board for the Art Center, I've been at the jail that's in the building yet. You did good. Finish talking.
Steve Lewis looked like there was about 5 there. Steve Lewis looked like he was about 5.
I think some of us had a question about who was Tiddlywink and Humpty Dumpty, or whatever their nicknames were. I think they agreed that they knew who they were.
Mr. Porter, can you clarify that?
What's that?
The 2 characters that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah, well, there were 2 people here in town that, the old man, that, okay, there are 2 people here in the old town that, when I first got here in 1951, 2, 3, 4, 5, in that area, that were around. One of them we called Poop-de-Doop, and he would move into an old cabin here in town somewhere, and he would have a stove, and he had pigeons. He always had pigeons and dogs.
Yes,
And
I remember Poopadoo, we call him Poopadoo, and I always thought to call him Poopadoo because he had so many dogs, there was a lot of poop.
actually,
I don't know if that's true.
I was told much later that Poop-de-Doop, that his real name was Bill D'Angelo, and that he was a World War II veteran and hero. But something that he did in the service caused him to kind of get strange, okay? And whatever it was, he was a hero, and somehow it was involved with pigeons and dogs, and that's why he kept the pigeons. Now, that's what I was told. I don't know that's for sure, but that's what I was told. The other one was Jiminy Crickets, and Jiminy Crickets lived down by Kenai Joe's. There was a hotel down there, and he lived in there, but in that area. I'm not sure which house he lived in or what, but he lived there. But Jiminy Crickets, what I remember of him is in those days, we used to go down in front of Kenai there and take the hooligan nets and fish hooligan I know that there were a few tourists around, and my brother and I, and my sister, we'd go down and fish hooligans, bring them up the bank, and we'd sell them to the tourists. It was a penny a piece or 3 cents cleaned, and we'd sell them that. Well, Jiminy Crickets would come down and fish with us sometimes because we could make enough money where Jiminy Crickets would take the money, go to the store, and he would buy Coke for us and beer for him. So that net was really important to him. And we were down there fishing one day, and whoever was holding the net somehow let it get loose. And it was floating down the river, and Jiminy Crickets was on top of the hill. And I think it took him 3 steps to get down that hill, and he dove out in the river and grabbed a hold of the line on that net and pulled it back ashore. He wasn't about to let his beer money go.
Well, nicknames are very common in our town, you know. We had one guy, his name was Hackabox.
Oh, yes, I remember Hackabox.
And the reason, and I don't know if it's true, but the story was that when they would go clam digging, he only filled his box half full, always. So that's how he got his nickname. Whether that's true, it's still a good story.
Yeah.
Can you just ask us what post office box everybody had, just, do they remember?
Oh, I remember ours, that was 99.
We were 107.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people, you had no idea what their names were. Cold Potato, Gangway, a couple of them. Yeah. So, but we were talking about teachers. Just let me interject one thing. We had Albert Munson's wife. I don't know what her first name was.
Jessie Munson.
She was amazing. She was a music teacher, and she taught us. Too bad we weren't smart enough to really absorb everything that she had to say, but she taught us a lot about the basics of actually Western culture through music. And she was just terrific, and somebody that I always really appreciated. And we were scruffy, for sure, but to get that kind of insight into the human condition and so forth, it was really worthwhile.
What was her first name? It was Kay and Leah and Donald were the kids.
Is that right?
And I went to see Mrs. Munson, probably been 10, 12 years ago now, but she was living in Mount Shasta at the time. And I went
really?
to visit her.
Kevin Gibbs, on that picture there, they're showing Steve Lewis, and he looks like he's about 5 years old, and he's the same age as I am, and I was born in 1943. Now that will put you sometime, now we came in here in 53, I did with my parents, and I don't remember that library at all. I just remember the one where the Fine Arts is over here. I was into that one, probably in 56, 55, 50, yeah, 55. Would have been into the Fine Arts.
Was that picture might have been in 48 then?
Yeah, that would be my guess. You get some, now that building, somebody said it burned down. Now, I don't remember those steps in this town when we came in at 53.
Those steps look to me like the steps for the old Civic Center, or before that, it was also called the old territorial school.
Right.
And those steps look to me like those steps.
Now, when we got here in 53, the new one over here, the concrete one, is where the Richards was.
Yeah.
And that's where we went to school.
I went to school there from 1st grade through 12.
Thank you.
My name is Carmen Steffel. I'm with the Soldotna Historical Society. This may be old news to you. Please tell me. I was told by Martha Mary about a video that her mother, Rusty Lancashire, made. It's a home video, keep that in mind. Did find it in an empty box at the Kenai Library. Perhaps everybody has seen it? Mm-hmm. So luckily, we converted it to a DVD out at our Historical Society. Shows, and keep in mind, it's a home video done by Rusty, but it shows the Spur Highway, the way the Spur Highway looks sometime between 48 and 52. A lot of home videos of the kids and stuff like that, but really some neat, a lot of footage of old Kenai. So keep in mind, we have that available, certainly would be happy to make copies. I shared it with Marge Mullen. A little bit difficult to watch, but it's a real treasure, and glad we still have it. Thank you.
Other questions, comments, memories?
Carmen, are you the one that gave me this picture? Well, this is a picture of Rusty Lancashire, and I think when you're making plans for future meetings, this one is brought together so much interest, you ought to do it again.
So this is Rusty Lancashire. She's a beauty.
Just like at the Soldotna Historical Society, we started doing a Homesteader Pioneer Spotlight, and the Lancashires were the first one we chose. I begged Martha, I said, where's a picture of your mother as a model? We heard she was a model. Finally, I have received some. I will also be making a DVD slideshow of the different ones. And again, another treasure they shared were great newspaper articles that Larry, about what a hero Larry is and was. So.
Carmen?
Rusty was the one that delivered mail to most of us for many years.
I knew Rusty fairly well, as many of you did. I'll probably start crying here. Okay. You talk about a storyteller. She was so funny. And she told me about, what was his name? Anyway, somebody who died, a guy, as she said, well, he wasn't much, but, he was part of our tribe, you might say, locally, and I didn't know, it was before my time, by a few years anyway. Anyway, he died, and so they felt they needed to do something. Peggy, I know you can remember who that was. So they kind of hauled him down the main street, and he was in some kind of casket. And, well, they wanted to have some music for this guy. So Geneva, who was the barber, some of you remember Geneva. She had fairly large bosoms, and the guys really liked to sit there because they were pretty much surrounded by Geneva's bosoms as they got their haircut. So anyway, and Geneva played the accordion. Now this is according to Rusty. And so you can picture them walking down the street right out here in Main Street, and the only song that Geneva knew was Fascination, which is just funny enough. And then putting this guy, this casket in the hole, it tripped, it fell over. I don't remember if the body fell out or not, but they had to redo that, and probably didn't have Fascination again, but that was the story of that time. Just so funny.
That was a real interesting funeral. Very interesting. I'm not going to talk about it. I would like to show you, this is not changing the subject at all, but it's bragging about my kids. Actually, not bragging, it's what I did. When we became a state, and the newspaper came out, I took a picture of the paper with my boys. This one, Jimmy has a statehood picture, but I have one that has both of them. And that's when we became a state. And this was the same picture 25 years later with the two boys. That's the same thing. You remember my Jimmy and Joe, that's what they looked like then. And this is 50 years. The same picture. Isn't that kind of neat?
Yes.
So now I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to last till 75. I don't know whether I will or not, but I know they won't take the picture if I'm not here to do it for them. Anyway, I thought you might enjoy seeing those of you that remember my kids, who are still here, by the way, with their grandchildren and carrying on.
The fellow that died was Hilding Seaberg. He spoke with a very thick accent. I'm not sure just exactly what country he came from, but he lived over just behind Helen Jones' store there. and he was something of a mechanic. And he would work on vehicles until he got enough money to go buy a case of beer or whatever, then he didn't see Evelyn for a while. But he left $50 for his pallbearers, and so to have a net. Well, they were drunker than, by the time it was time to put Evelyn away, they were quite intoxicated, and that's how the mishap happened with this castle. Put a little color in the Edie, who ran the sort of the house of recreation for men, was there, and she had taken care of him for a time, and so she was there in a red dress with it was quite too short. She was a little on the chubby side, quite too short, hemline, and beads going along down around her, in front of her tummy, let's say. That was quite a story. But, another thing too, a lot of the fellows that were here, there was serious alcohol issues, and people that had come in, and they were World War II vets who were very damaged. And they would live in little shacks of sorts, called them Moino shacks, but there were a couple around town. And they were good guys, but they were, they have post-traumatic stress syndrome. One of them, Jim O'Day, I remember, he spoke in Bryan all the time. But he had, a grenade had taken a large part of his abdomen and rearranged it. And he would have serious problems all the time. But I remember them as good guys. But there was a remnant of World War II vets here that were experiencing a lot of pain.
I agree that they were, they had the village, they had some people with drinking problems. They weren't bad people. They just, would go on and chew. And they didn't have like a liquor store or anything. I think a lot of it was home rule or whatever. They got their wine. I just loved those the native guys. They were sweet. Some of them had drinking problems. Well, there's one guy that I just loved. We call him Yaya. Now, I don't know if that's Indian or Russian. I don't really know what it meant. Maybe it's uncle or whatever. But I just loved that little man. And he got put in jail because he probably drunk, whatever. So he snuffed, a lot of people do snuff. So I went over, I don't know, I got 10 cents or 20 cents, bought a little package of Peerless tobacco, and it was the jail that we were at. And I went over there, because I just love this little man, and, like, they had the try to figure out what, but they didn't lock it. They just put him in there and didn't lock the gate, and they had a jailer there that cooked for this person. A little stool. Well, I would get that snuff, and I go sit on the stool and visit with him. Because he was in jail. But they weren't bad people. They really weren't. They were sweet, but they were very polite, very respectful. Except, and everybody in the village cared about them. If something happened, they took care of them. So they weren't just a bunch of hoodlums running around. They just had little love for the alcohol.
Yeah, just interject one thing. No one ever went hungry in Kenai. If you were down on your luck, not a problem. You had a warm place to stay, and you had something to eat. And you could walk almost in anybody's front door, and we never, of course, obviously, we never locked the door, but everybody always had a home, somebody to take care of them.
In hearing a little bit about the color of Kenai, just one thing, I was lucky enough to have been involved with rebuilding the cabins for the historical park. And one of the cabins, the one that we call the 3 Scandinavian cabins, colored it as being bachelors living in this. one of the things we found was part of the chinking was part of the lady's corset, which still had whalebone stains. So, you know, there had to be something good going on there.
Hey, Mary, I want to share something. My dad and mom, well, my mom and dad ran Rieger Faith. And so we lived right behind it, Ed Knight and Lorraine Knight's house. And one morning we got up, our little house had, you walk in the front door, there wasn't much there, but there was a little cot there. And we got up in the morning and there was some strange man sleeping in this little cot. And Billy got up, and I got up, and then Mom got up, Daddy got up. And we're like the three bears, you know, we're looking down, we don't know who this man is. And he looks up at us, and he was so embarrassed. I still to this day really don't know the whole story. But he was so embarrassed, he thought he'd ended up in his own home. And I think my dad cooked him breakfast and off he went. But it was just, our doors were open, right? And he just came in and he was tired.
Other questions, comments, memories?
I have a question about the Kenai Airport that existed when PNA.
I have a question about the airport, the runway, when PNA was the airline that flew in. Does anybody know when that was built and who built it?
The old one, the old airport?
The old airport, the one that would be near where the ball fields are, out towards the highway.
He's saying military too.
I don't know, but you know that before PNA was there, it was, we had an airline called Woodley's. Do you remember that? I mean, reading about that? Yeah, we had a small, it was just small, airplane. Went to Anchorage, but it was Woodley's. And I think his first name was Arthur, but I'm not sure.
WOODL.
Woodley, yeah, Woodley Airlines. I think it had connection with Pacific Northern Airlines. Yeah, right. Yeah, remember
Verification.
What year are you talking about?
Verification.
Evelyn, what year are you thinking?
Well, I have no idea. I know PNA was coming in the 50s. Yeah. And before that, it was Woodley.
Woodley. Do you know where they landed?
Well, it was, I imagine it's down by where the old car wash is we were talking about. There, that's where, in the 50s, when I left Kenai on a trip, that's where they were landing.
I could tell an old story, just a quick one here.
Give him the microphone.
Years ago,
Hang on, Mr. Porter. Well, Mr. Porter.
you know, most people around here had something to do with commercial fishing in those days. And my dad was a drifter. And I can remember, I don't remember what year it was, but I remember being in a boat and everybody had HF radios. You talked back and forth on the HF and you always knew what everybody else was saying because your radio was on. And I remember some outside fishermen that had come up from, I believe, Columbia River to fish just the summer here and then they go back home. And they were up and it was that time the run was not real strong and nobody was doing real good. And these people got on the radio and they started complaining about how terrible it was up here and the poor fishing and everything. And when they hung up, it would quit their conversation on the radio. Somebody local, I don't know who it was, but somebody local picked up their mic and they said, PNA leaves twice a day.
that when I came down with my two tiny children to see what my husband had built for a cabin, it was April 12th, 1948, and we had to land on the beach. And Louis Neeson met us down there with some kind of horse and wagon to take us up the hillside. And I do know that the airport had been built, and the only reason that we were landing on the beach was it was breakup. And the airport was in pretty rough condition and so, and it did have ramps at both ends, metal ramps with holes in them that the Army had used.
Thank you, Henry Naxted, and appreciate you folks coming here, but I'd like to address Barb Jewell. Especially we're talking about the airport, but it's really kind of a thank you that I'm 60 years old, so I'm one of the youngest people here, but I'm glad to be here. And my dad was badly mauled by a brown bear in 1951 in September, and Waldo Coyle got into the river, got down, and then there were some medics. Anyway, they did get to the Kenai airport, and Marge was there with an airplane waiting to take her to Anchorage because she was ready to deliver Mary, I believe. And she let my dad take that airplane so he could get further medical attention. Wow. But anyway, he was pretty poorly, in pretty poor shape and all of that. And but thank you very much for doing that. And perhaps that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Anything else?
Let me just say one quick thing about the airport. We did have a small U.S. Air Force contingent, or I believe about probably where Ron's rented center is now, in that general area. And they had actually, it came to light here just a few years ago that they had left quite a big mess of oil and fuel that had drained into the ground. But I believe that's how that airport got there, is that during the Second World War they wanted access to military flights in and out of here, if necessary.
And the gentleman in the, no, next to Mr. Porter.
Jimmy Gibbs.
Gibbs. So Gibbs Apparel, is that?
Yes.
Seriously?
Seriously.
My mom worked at Gibbs Apparel. And probably, my brother was born in 57, and he would sleep in one of the drawers.
Yeah,
Rather Weaver.
Dad and I started on that after we come off the homestead.
Hang on. We want to hear this.
Dad and Mom homesteaded in 1956-57. We were the second crew. You know, Marge was in the first crew. Anyway, when we come off the homestead in spring of 57, Dad and I started on building that building. Mom went to town and went to work for the FAA to help finance it. So I could go on for quite a while, and so I think we're getting a little bit long here. Any more questions on that? Janice and Joyce.
Sounds like it's going to be a great December social. Right? Lots of stories to tell.
I just want to say thank you to you guys for coming and doing this. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.